As you already know, we are a network of practice, research and policy, and we are growing. Next year we will have more partners and more countries. This is a very brief description of our project, but this is already told you by Barbara. This is a 4-year project. We are at the beginning of this journey, and we are learning. We are also learning from our mistakes, and we hope that next year it will be even better, but I think that what we are presenting now is also quite impressive. So the topic for the first year was making teacher and school leader careers more attractive in Europe. We know that there are several challenges that education systems face with regards to teachers and school leaders, and we listed just a few that we found in research. There is a tremendous shortage. Of course, there is also an aging teaching population. There are very good teachers who are leaving the teaching profession very early, within 5 years after finishing their initial education and joining the teaching force. There is more and more demotivation coming from different sources. Teacher burnout is becoming a very, very serious problem in more and more countries in Europe. Also, we are struggling with teachers experiencing the feeling of having a low social status, a low level of recognition by their own communities. Salaries are very often not really comparable to that of similarly educated people, and also to people who have similar responsibilities. Very often, the system doesn't really provide for professional development needs and support needs in daily work of teachers. And at the end of the day, we are facing the challenge of providing quality inclusive education for all in Europe, which is a goal for the European education area, but also sustainable development goal number 4 for the whole world. We were doing our work in a policy framework that I'm not going to talk much about because we have Thomas Pritzko from the Commission who is going to talk about the European Commission, but what you have to all understand, most of you of course know it, that school education is national competence. So whatever we are working on together has to be formulated in a way that on national level our partners, be them from policy, research or practice, can use it. Because European Commission or European organizations can do relatively little. The thing that is European competence is higher education, so there is a European teacher training area. Initial teacher training is something that we can have recommendations for the whole of Europe, more or less, of course with some restrictions. Shoot me, Thomas, when I'm saying something that's wrong. And also, it's a relatively new development that the European Union has recognized that they have to focus on school education. So, in the ESHA recommendations that were published when the social pillar, the European Pillar of Social Rights was published at the Gothenburg Summit, they emphasized the importance of teachers, and they emphasized the importance of initial and also in-service training for more inclusive quality education in Europe. Because education is national competence, the European Commission is mostly using the method that is called open method of coordination, which is basically a sharing of good, inspiring practices and trying to somehow work together to provide similar level of education, but not to harmonize anything. One tool of this is the working group on schools, and what we are working on here during this conference, the policy recommendations, will feed into the work of the working group on schools. We also have quite clear instructions on what kind of report to deliver for them, because what is the final report of year 1 of the European Education Policy Network will be published together by the European Commission with the report of working group on schools. And I think this gives us a big responsibility, and also it is a recognition of the work that we are doing, and we have to live up to these requirements. In year 1, we made 4 desk research papers. The methodology was that we asked all the members of the network to provide us with research evidence, inspiring practices, and other ideas related to the topic of teacher and school leader careers. And the partners who were responsible for desk research were working with the documents and practice examples provided by the partners. And we produced 4 desk research papers, which were focusing on different angles of the same topic. We have a paper on the recent education research in the field, one on inspiring practices from the practitioners and parents' perspective, one on inspiring policy advice and policy implementation practices, and one on the most relevant EU-funded projects. Based on that, we are still finalizing a state of affairs report, which is combining a little bit of history, how European Education Policy Network was established, because it is building on the heritage of EPNOSO, the European Policy Network on School Leadership, and also policy messages related to and coming from the research that we were doing. And what we are doing now, that's the other outcome of the desk research, is that we are going to publish a policy recommendations report based on what we have in the desk research. So we are not going to reinvent the wheel, try to find for new resources, and we are planning to develop it together with all of you here at the conference. When we were doing the desk research, we were given a lot of freedom by Mika. Mika Risku was responsible for quality and process. But what happened was that we more or less came up with the same headings in the different desk research papers, namely that whatever we found that motivates teacher, that supports the attractiveness of teaching professions and school leader positions is one of, or some of these 5 areas: social status and salary systems, autonomy and responsibility, recruitment and initial teacher education, professional support during your teaching career, and career pathways and appraisal systems. With social status and salary systems, what we found is that the main drive behind becoming and staying in the profession is the perceived benefits or the convenience of teaching. So it is a very complex kind of motivation, and when we are tackling the social status and salary systems issue, it has to be taken into consideration. So it's definitely not the high salary that teachers are choosing the profession and deciding to stay, but there are several other aspects that have to be taken into consideration. The research shows that the primary drive for young people to choose teaching professions is altruistic. And it is balanced against other factors like salaries later on. Basically, young people become teachers because they want to make the life of children better. They want to change the world by better education. So they usually have a very strong motivation. And of course, we're talking about those who choose the teaching professions in a conscious way, because we also know that in some countries, the teacher training colleges have a relatively low threshold. And well, this is something that also has to be considered. I will talk about it a little bit later with recruitment. It's definitely not only the salary that is attractive, both for choosing the profession and staying for a longer period, but the working conditions, the way you can balance your workload against your personal life. I personally hate this work-life balance notion because work is part of your life, but everybody understands it because it's a common phrase. So how you can balance your work against your personal life. Interestingly enough, long summer breaks is still something that is considered, but it's of course not a primary reason. It's not only the salary that is attractive, but also pension and insurance schemes. I don't know how familiar you are with different other countries, but in some countries, once you are an employee, you have full insurance and you have kind of a full state pension. In other countries, it really depends on your employment. For me personally, this was an interesting finding because I thought it is only in the US, but apparently not. I was learning while doing this. So it's not primarily the salaries that are important, but at the same time, salaries are very crucial because research also shows a clear link between higher teacher salaries and learning outcomes in a country. So while teacher salaries are not a primary drive for people becoming teachers or people leaving the profession, there is no cause and effect, but very clearly there is a correlation between higher salaries and better learning outcomes. Interestingly enough, there is very little research on social status. So while we are quite clear that teachers would like to be recognized and have a high social status in all societies, the only comprehensive research that we found on this is the Global Teacher Status Index. And if you're interested in the details, I think it's worth having a look at it. You will find the reference in the research papers. And for inspiration, we highlighted UK, Ireland, and Finland. We have colleagues from all three countries, and they can say that although they have seemingly good solutions, especially in the UK and Finland, they are still struggling with teacher shortages. So it's very clear that salary and social status is not enough. Second element, second factor was autonomy and responsibility. And this is a very delicate balance, according to the research findings. What is very important is that the autonomy to choose your teaching material, to be able to redefine your curriculum according to the needs of your students, to have flexibility of how you are developing the year, it definitely increases motivation. It is shown from very old research as well. It's, the one I quoted is from 1981, it's ancient, but also verified by recent research. At the same time, what is also quite important is that there is no direct relation, or very weak direct relation, between autonomy and innovative practices. Which means that if we really want innovation, and if we really want to change schools, we also need to support autonomous teachers in an adequate way. And it is also clearly shown by research because the confidence level of teachers to face challenges in this very rapidly changing environment of school and also the world depends on the level of support that they receive. On the other hand, external performance targets and accountability towards external players is a demotivating factor. So being very autonomous but also highly accountable can be something that demotivates teachers from staying on. When it comes to school leaders, the responsibility and autonomy is one factor, but it's really important. So to be an autonomous school leader with a high responsibility level is much more attractive than being a simple administrator. And the nice thing is that the inspiring practice has disappeared, which is Finland on this slide. I have no idea what happened to it because in the previous one we could see it. We definitely quoted Finland as a good example for a balanced way of making teachers responsible, autonomous, but also supported. The third factor, as I mentioned, is recruitment and initial teacher education. And here, as I kind of hinted before, we basically face a major dilemma. Finland has given a very clear answer that they have set very high standards for entering initial teacher education. But it is a dilemma because the moment you start raising entry standards, it also decreases the number of applicants. It is very important how you are setting the standards for when you are recruiting people. The European Commission already asked for better quality initial training, for better quality education, and it has been answered by a high number of teacher training colleges. but we still see that probably there is some need for more effort. Coming back to the motivation to become teachers, when young people start initial teacher training and when they go into their training, their intrinsic motivation to give something to their community increases during the training, while the extrinsic motivation, which is based on perceived rewards, and of course not the real rewards, because you never know what the real rewards are, the perceived rewards of teaching doesn't really change during the training, especially not if they are not in a kind of apprenticeship scheme. For recruitment and initial education, it is a very interesting finding that over 1/3 of school systems also offer alternative pathways to teacher qualifications, so you don't have to necessarily go through a full cycle of initial teacher education. And I think it's an issue that you can discuss. It has a lot of benefits, and also you can discuss what the dangers of them could be. When young teachers leave the initial education and they also try to get jobs, most of European school systems have an open recruitment system, which means that you can knock on the door of a school and you can try to get employed there. So recruitment usually happens on school level, even if the employment status might be different. So the decision of taking somebody to your own teaching force is more often made by the school head than the actual employment contract. So in some cases, the teacher will still be employed by the state or a municipality, but in 3/4 of the countries, the actual recruitment happens on school level. And when it comes to school leaders, it is primarily and predominantly a career step for teachers, and although in a number of countries there are alternative pathways to school leadership, still the majority of school leaders come from the teaching profession. And in this field we found 2 inspiring practices. One is hidden. Both of them were EU-funded projects. One is a master level program. The second one that you cannot see, but I think you can see it in house space, where you also have this presentation, is a doctorate program for teachers. For all stages of career, it's not only CPD that is important, but also in class or in school support, coaching, supervision, mentoring. But it is especially important for initial stages. So most of the countries in Europe already have some kind of induction stage for teachers, when they have special supervision, special support, very often a reduced workload, so they have less lessons, but they are very often obliged to also take some extra classes. And what is very helpful, if they can build their own personal professional network that can help their initial difficulties. Well, we all know, we have all been 20-something-year-old teachers, and it's not very easy. What we also found is that while we have a lot of focus on CPD, and I don't want to talk too much about it, it's compulsory in most European countries, it's very, very important to have other kind of support systems, both personal and professional. By that I mean that the most successful school systems offer health, well-being, counseling services for the teachers themselves, for their personal well-being, but they also offer professional services in the schools, so when they need the help of a psychologist with one student or a speech therapist, it is all given. With this respect, what I quoted several times, I think it's a very good symbol of how we should support teachers, is that when you're flying and you are given the safety instructions, you are told that pull your own mask first and then help anybody in need. So if teachers are not well, whatever support you have in the classroom, it will not be helpful. So first of all, it's the teacher who has to feel good. The situation is very, very similar for school leaders. I have one more slide, I will be quick. Coaching and mentoring programs are very welcome, and they also are necessary, especially for school leaders who are in the early stages of their careers. Here we have 2 inspiring practices known to all of you, but we found them very important for professional support: e-twinning and European School Academy. And the last element was career pathways and appraisal systems. Here the findings are quite simple. In Europe, we basically have 2 different career pathways: a flat one where you are promoted according to the number of years that you have done, and you also get a salary raise, so no special thing that increases your salary on the way when you do more or something like that. And you also have the multi-level career pathways where the role of the school leader is usually really large, because the teachers are individually assessed and given salary raises and also promotions according to the extra work that they are doing. What research found is the motivation is just the same. So it's not more motivating to have a multi-level career path. For me, that was interesting, because I would have assumed that a multi-level career path is much more attractive for people who are more innovative. But this is just the same. And in both cases, you have some kind of appraisal system in place in most European countries, which is on the one hand basis for promotion and salary increase, but also what is very important that we don't really think about it is that it is for detecting low performance challenges that the teachers are facing, so that there is the possibility to intervene and support the individual teacher when they need that. The methods are very traditional in most countries. It's basically classroom observation, discussions, self-evaluation, and although the ACA was asking for more student voice and parent voice in appraisal systems, it's not really there in most of the countries. At the same time, there are some less systematic examples like awards that they lead to high level of professional personal satisfaction, but not to salary increase. But they are very popular, and it really raises the self-esteem of people. And here I brought 2 inspiring practices. One is a complex appraisal system that involves the teaching force, but also the students and the teachers. And while we are all humans, the last example is from my own country, where we have the only award awarded by parents to teachers, including relatively large sum of money for partnership approaches to education.